Welcome to One Round. I'm your host, Darrell Dawsey. It's been a little more than 3 months since former Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison. Here in Detroit, sentiment over the sentencing has been divided, to say the least. For some, the sentence was appropriate, just desserts for a former mayor who was found guilty of a raft of federal charges. However, for others, the sentence was seen as harsh, as excessive, as an overreach. To them, they see the 28 years as an essential life sentence for a 43-year-old man. Here to discuss the sentence and to talk a little bit about the case is Kwame Kilpatrick's actual defense attorney, Mr. Harold Gurewitz. Harold, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Let's get into this conversation, shall we?
Okay.
All right. Just tell me a little bit about the sentence itself. I mean, was there a precedent for this thing? A lot of people think that this just kind of came out of left field.
That's really the right place to start, because all this does happen in a very controlled setting pursuant to rules and procedures and based upon legal precedent. One of the basic principles in this sentencing was the law that says in federal court that a sentence should be sufficient, but not greater than necessary to serve its purpose. Mm-hmm. And to arrive at that conclusion, a judge has a set of basic principles to follow with regard to punishment, with comparing the circumstances of this case to other ones.
Okay.
Included in those is a consideration in federal court of sentence guidelines, and the judge was required to determine what those were in advance. And then when she arrived at that, she was required to consider whether or not the sentence should be within those guidelines, should be more, or should be less. Mm-hmm. In fact, she decided here the sentence should be a little bit less than the bottom end of those guidelines, which were, I believe, 360 months to life, and made the sentence, instead of 30 months, 30 years, 28 years. Mm-hmm. In my view, and what I expressed to the court at the time, was that was substantially greater than is necessary to accomplish everything that was intended to be accomplished in this case.
I mean, there are people who've killed people who've gotten less time.
That's absolutely right. What I think you have to understand is how we got to where we were in October when the sentence took place. All right. The kind of sentences that have been handed out, particularly in federal courts in the last 30 years or so, have gone up and up and up, and people have just gotten used to big numbers. Mm-hmm. To some people, 10 years, I think, seems like a lot of time. To me, because I started doing this kind of work more than 30 years ago, a sentence seems like a lot of time that's more than 7 or 8 years. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you look at the comparables, you can see that a sentence less than 28 years and closer to the 15, which we ask for, would be appropriate here.
Do you think that a lot of people have said that race may have played a role? Some people think that that the federal court system was upset with Kwame Kilpatrick because he didn't simply plead out initially. They thought that he was arrogant, he was defiant, and that this was a way of not just punishing him, but trying to break him, essentially. What do you think about those characters?
Well, I think what you have to look at is all the things that were said by the prosecutors and what they filed with the court and the things that the judge said at the time of sentencing. And they focused upon what they thought the community felt about the case and what was part of this long episode.
People were upset, but they didn't necessarily want to see the man go away for what amounts to life.
That's right. The government did. The government wanted him not to go away for life, but for 28 years. And as you pointed out in your intro, that is close to life for a man 43 years old. So I think that the bottom line on this in 3 minutes is that you don't need to do this much. If you look at other sentences of people in similar kinds of positions around the country, you can see that the sentences that the judges have imposed have been well below guidelines. For people like the governor of Illinois.
Real quick question before we wrap up, because we got to go really quick. Yes.
Okay.
Does race play a role? Yes or no?
There was no obvious way that anybody could determine that was a factor in the sentencing proceeding.
All right. Well, some people are going to see it differently nonetheless.
That may be.
All right. Well, Harold, thank you so much. Appreciate having you.
You're welcome.
This is One Round. I'm Darrell Dawsey. Thanks so much for being with us.